Cord. I'm glad you're here. This is a 10-minute Bible study for Thursday, February 3rd, 2022. We're looking at Matthew chapter 20. The first group of verses, what is it? Verse 1 through, is it 16? Yeah, verse 1 through 16. It's one of the parables Jesus told, and it's one of the ones, it's a parable that if you were in the situation that he describes, you would almost certainly be on the wrong side of this parable. I would too. So what I want to do is read it, and then I'm going to share a little bit of thoughts as I go, and also at the end. And just a reminder that this is a 10-minute Bible study. At 7 o'clock, there's a live Zoom where I'll answer questions. We'll discuss if you want. Anyone who wants to join can join. Usually it's a pretty small group, but thought I will throw that out there. You can also ask questions in text messages or direct messages or just in the comments of either YouTube or Facebook, and I will hop on that. But in the Zoom login and stuff are in the description, both on YouTube and on Facebook. So, all that being said, here's Jesus. For the kingdom of heaven, it's like a landowner went out early in the morning to hire workers for his vineyard. So it's like a guy goes up and hires the day laborers, right? He agreed to pay them a denarius, which, according to my Bible, is the usual daily wage at the time. He agreed to pay them the usual daily wage for a day, and he sent them into his vineyard. And evidently they agreed, because it doesn't sound like he forced them. It sounds like they went willingly. About 9 in the morning, he went out and saw others standing in the marketplace doing nothing. He told them, "You also go, work in my vineyard, and I will pay you whatever's right." So they went. Very trusting fellows. He went out again at noon, and about 3 in the afternoon did the same thing. About 5 in the afternoon, he went out, found still others standing around. He asked them, "Why have you been standing here all day long doing nothing?" "No one has hired us," they answered. He said to them, "You also go and work in my vineyard." Now, it's interesting. They say no one has hired us, but this dude's been checking like every few hours. So you almost wonder, you almost have to wonder about the truthfulness of what they're saying. Like, has really nobody hired you, or have you not been around to hire? But what's really cool, or horrible, depending on your perspective, is that the landowner still offers him a job. Come on, come to my vineyard, even at 5 o'clock, right before quitting time. And so verse 9, this is where it gets weird. The workers who were hired about 5 in the afternoon came in, each received a denarius. So they received the wage as though they had worked the whole day. So when those came who were hired first, they expected to receive more, even though they had agreed to work for the same amount. When they received it, they began to grumble against the landowner. "These who were hired last worked only 1 hour," they said, "and you've made them equal to us, who've borne the burden of the work and the heat of the day." Like, have you ever been like, I'm just thinking, there's all kinds of things you could compare this to, right? Like, even today, one of the big issues is like wage equality. Like, do you pay the same people the same amount of money for the same work? A huge piece of the feminist movement is making the claim that women are paid, 75 cents for every dollar that men are paid. Maybe that's women of color. Black people don't get the same pay as white people. Hispanic people don't get the same pay as Asian people. There's a sense of justice, I think, that we all have, that you should be paid based on the value you give to the employer, not based on your race or anything like that. So, at some level, these guys have a very legitimate complaint. Like, hey, wait a minute. We worked a lot harder than those other guys, and they got the same thing we did. Like that's totally not fair. Or have you ever been, like, you remember back in school when there were group projects? If you were a diligent student, a group project was a terrible thing. because the group got the grade, you did all the work, and there was some bozo off in the corner, playing on his phone, or gosh, not when I was in college. When I was in college, it was some bozo over in the corner, like, I don't know what they were doing, to be honest, because I was doing the group project. I bet you were too, right? So this is frustrating for those of us who are kind of driven, those of us who are achievement oriented, those of us who have a profound sense of fairness. It's unfair in a way, but consider the fact that it's not like the landowner paid them less than they had agreed to. So they were getting a fair wage by what their labor was worth. So the frustrating thing for them is the comparison. Well, why are those people getting the same thing I am when I've worked all day? It wasn't you didn't pay me fairly. It was those people deserve less, or I deserve more. It says they expected more when they found out that the people who had hardly worked got a lot. It doesn't, another interesting thing is it doesn't say they were surprised. It doesn't say they were like, wow, I can't believe the landowner gave these guys so much money. Verse 13, but he, the landowner, answered one of them, I'm not being unfair to you, friend. Even though they were griping at him, friend. I'm not being unfair to you, friend. Didn't you agree to work for a denarius? Take your pay and go. I want to give the one who was hired last the same as I gave you. Don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money? Or are you envious because I am generous? That is such a hard teaching. Because, of course, the landowner represents God. And I think it's easy to be jealous of generosity. It's easy to be frustrated with grace shown to someone else when you feel like you earned something. And then Matthew makes this statement. So the last will be first and the first will be last, which is very similar to stuff he said, or very similar to the thing he said at the end of the last teaching in chapter 19, when he's talking about the rich in the kingdom of God, when he says, many who are first will be last and many who are last will be first. So it's this is supposed to be some sort of parallel teaching. It makes you wonder what was going on in the church or the community that would prompt Matthew, or before him, Jesus, to tell this story. Were there arguments among the disciples about who had been with Jesus longest? Maybe who had sacrificed the most to be with Jesus? Was there, we know in the early church, and presumably at the time of Jesus as well, there was racism against the Gentile followers of Christ, because the Jewish followers felt like, hey, this is our ancestral religion and you guys are just coming into it, like, take a back seat. And so it could be probably addressing that. What might it address today? I know there are some churches, I don't think this is one of them, but there are some churches where there are people who've been in the church for generations and they feel like they get an extra vote, or they get an extra say, or they get to do things that other people in the church wouldn't get to do because their family's been in the church for so long. We have our own pew. We own the church office. I remember once I had a woman come in to make photocopies for her business to the church photocopier rather than get a photocopier for her business. This was a long time ago. It's like 25, 30 years ago. And used the church office as her own supply cabinet. And it was because she felt like, hey, I tithe, I get to use, right? Despite the fact that her business had nothing to do with church work. it's easy to get a sense of entitlement. And so, and that can show up in a lot of different ways. It can show up in us sort of using things like this woman did as though they were our own. But in this particular case, it's showing up in the almost frustration. Yeah, definitely frustration that the early workers were showing towards the mercy and grace shown to the people who came in late. So my question is, how do you avoid that? What are some things that we can do, or some signs of that kind of entitlement that can tip us off that we've fallen into that trap? Hey, it's been 11 minutes, so I want to wrap up. If you'd like to join on Zoom at 7 o'clock, feel free. Again, the credentials are in the description. If not, say hello online, leave a message, leave a smiley, leave a question, DM me, whatever you want to do. If none of those, then have a great evening and hope to see you soon. God bless.